Hello. Once again, we had some sound problems last week, so I wanted to redo my sermon so that it can be on YouTube in a manner that you can all view it and hear what needs to be heard. And it just added to the week, because last week was quite a week for me. I was there on the day that there was the protests at the hospitals, and they're all across the province. People somehow believing that they were being forced to be vaccinated and putting up signs saying, my body, my choice, and taking up all the parking. I can't say I handled it really well. I rolled down my car window and shouted out to them, please, please, please get vaccinated. And they started chanting, so I just said, shame, 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 shame. This wasn't necessarily the best thing to do, because it formulated their group stronger. They feel oppressed, and it, reinforces their sense of justified protest. They get entrenched. But it's hard. It's really hard to stay grounded in those moments. There is a piece to this that I think was missing, and that is the idea of actually caring more, or caring for the community, taking care of the community around you. We've got to be a society now that we demand our personal freedom and autonomy over all else, to the point where it's harming our collective well-being. We aren't as community-minded as we were in the past. There's a stronger sense of personal isolation from the individual's impact on the community. We want to say that, well, I can do whatever I want, I won't have an impact. We see it, of course, in the manner in which we're continue to burn all the energy we want without thinking about the impact on the climate, the whole. There's a darkening on our society as this becomes stronger and stronger and more prevalent, and more the driving force between what we do and say and how we behave, or even what we buy, what we eat. And through the pandemic, these cracks in our social order have been breaking open wider. It partly comes from the underlying belief that one person is more worthy than another. Proverbs, the version we read last week, please check the lectionary. The rich and the poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. The virus, COVID-19 virus, teaches the same message, really. All humans are vulnerable to getting sick. No one's immune to the COVID-19 virus. Some are now because of the vaccinations, but the virus is a great equalizer. And of course, some are at greater risk, whether it's something in their own selves, their personal health, their immune system, or the inability to isolate themselves and protect themselves. Those whose livelihoods relies on and depends upon working in places where they can be potentially exposed. The homeless, and those geographically isolated from services that are provided. And of course those in very densely populated areas. In the letter to James, and this is James chapter 2, 1 to 10, or a portion of it, this issue is addressed as part of the how we welcome in the church. The rich and the high status in James's community were given preferential treatment. Brothers and sisters, he says, do you, with your acts of favoritism, really believe in the glorious Lord Jesus Christ? Like he's a gasp. You're welcoming the rich person and belittling the poor person? Do you actually believe? If a person with gold rings and fine clothes comes into your assembly, and if a person with dirty clothes and comes in, and you take notice of one wearing the fine clothes and say to the other, here, have a seat here, and then the other, the poor person, you say, sit at my feet? Have you not, with your distinctions among yourselves, become judges with evil thoughts? It's clear. The writer of this letter does not agree with this. Such preferential treatment is contrary to the very character of Christ. And it is also the prevailing habit in our society. Gospel is all about community. It's all about community. It's all about being with and working and loving the neighbor, right? About accepting all are beloved of God. About seeing the others with the eyes of God. The lesson has been made clear by our journey through the pandemic. Without each other, we would have sunken into a numbness of isolation and fear. There is a numbness in our lives. We hear the numbers from the new COVID cases each day, but what do they mean? They're just numbers. To really grasp the impact would be overwhelming. We must stay numb to cope. What does 600 new cases a day mean? I look at the graphs hoping to see the trends going the right way, but the graph is one step away from the numbers. 1 month or 1 day, or I'm proud of the people of BC and the government, and the next I'm fighting despair at the protests and the parties. We can't live or thrive with this roller coaster of feelings. So I yell shame, shame, shame out the windows to the crowd, protesting something that isn't really happening as I prepare myself to go in to visit a family in the palliative ward. Sometimes things break through the numbness and we feel the pain. The other evening I was listening to a Pink Floyd song, Comfortably Numb. I won't sing it for you. But the last lays, there is no pain, you are receding. Like a distant ship, smoke on the horizon, you're coming through only in waves. Your lips move, but I cannot hear what you're saying. When I was a child, I had a fever. My hands felt like 2 balloons. I've got that feeling again. I can't explain, you would not understand. This is not who I am. I have become comfortably numb. To be comfortably numb is a place of escape. To avoid the poor and the suffering is to protect our hearts from feeling. To disassociate from the number of 600 people getting new cases is the numbness that we want. But each of those 600 people represents another, 20, 30 who may have been exposed, but also who are now worrying, who are losing sleep, who are desperately hoping that their loved one, their friend, their family member is going to get better. So it's not 600 people, it's more like 6,000, 7,000 that are impacted just in that one day by the emotional impact. We wish to hide. But it becomes very personal and real when it's someone you know, a family member, a church member, a neighbor, or some point where you're put at risk yourself. We wish to hide. A pandemic has taught us that we can't turn away. We can't hide. We must look the pain and the fear with an open heart. Those who are generous are blessed, says James. And generous with our hearts, because he explains in the letter that what we're talking about here is love. James reminds us that the true works is to love our neighbor. The greatest calling of God is a calling to compassion. And this letter that is attributed to James, that is Jesus' brother, calls to us to take action. It is a letter teaching us wisdom. All the wisdom we need is that it is not faith alone that saves us, but good works. It may seem like a contradictory statement for the primary tenet of Christianity, that we're saved by grace, but this letter lifts up that works, that lifts up the works that are mostly must be about compassion for others in need. Saving not us then. Grace doesn't save us, but grace inspires us to go out and save others with our love and compassion, saving the community. So in fact, faith leads to works, and works leads to providing salvation and hope for others. What good is it? The letter says, my brothers and sisters, if you have faith but do not have works, can faith save you? If a brother and sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says, go in peace, keep warm, eat your fill, yet you do not supply for their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. The other day, a friend was walking along through Mill Lake, and they told me a story of seeing a homeless person sleeping on a bench, and there was somebody there standing, well dressed, showered that morning, had a good night's sleep in her home in her bed, saying to the homeless person, are you saved? Do you know Jesus? Well, that person needs to read the letter to James. If you say, go in peace, keep warm, eat your fill, yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? If you say to them, are you saved? Accept Jesus and you're saved? What good is that if you're not actually willing to give true compassion? Then we come to the gospel reading. And gospel reading is a story about Jesus. He's left the primary area, which is of Judea or Galilee. So he's outside of the traditional boundaries of Israel at the time. And he's resting in a house, and he actually wants to get away from the crowds. And a seraph, a Phoenician woman, comes in. This is a woman who is Phoenician or Canaanite, the traditional sort of enemies of the people of Israel at the time of David, right? So symbolically, she is the other. She's come asking him for help. She says to him, please will you heal my daughter? And he says, it's not appropriate for me to take the food from the children and throw it to the dogs. But she responds, look, even the family dogs underneath the table gets the crumbs that are left over from the children's meals. So Jesus changes his mind, and recognizing that she has a good point. He's called to compassion, so he responds with compassion for her, and her daughter is healed. The rule that Jesus relied on at the time was that people of Israel, the Jewish people, weren't supposed to have interactions with Gentiles. That's us. And so that's the rule. Jesus established the rule, or acknowledged the rule, and made the statement. But she challenges that systematic injustice, and he responds. There are many more layers to this story. I wonder if Jesus, was he feeling a little numb? And was this breaking through that numbness? What have we learned in our pandemic journey? Our social systems have systematic injustices that have made people more vulnerable, some people more vulnerable to catching the virus than others. Frontline workers, the people in our grocery stores, people that don't have the resources to isolate, people that have to be out and about. We have learned that we need each other more than our culture implies. We've learned that the supremacy of the value of individual autonomy can cause suffering in a time of crisis. And maybe we've learned to open our hearts so that we can no longer feel comfortably numb. We are called to risk being brokenhearted, to risk having our hearts cracked open with a need for compassion. Our task is to step past the systems of injustice just as Jesus did, and do this for the sake of the whole of the God's people. The wisdom of God is always about community. Make it so in your life too. Amen.